Hi, this is Al with a Canon challenge for week 5. Week 5 is deeply flawed structurally. The poetry is fantastic. The conversations around the poetry are all fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. But as a structural aspect of ModPo, it's a problem. If the course were 15 or 20 weeks long, we would take the contents, the 4 sections of Chapter 5, and we would extend them out. The Harlem Renaissance would be its own week for sure. The problems posed by Frost and Frostian poetics, which is currently now the 3rd of 4 sections of week 5, would be set out aside. So we would consider what might be called anti-modernist or conservative modernism. And the era of depression, the depression mode, the leftist or communist or anti-capitalist mode of poetry that rose to prominence in the 1930s, but actually started in the 20s and teens and had a mostly difficult relationship with modernist experiment, that would have its own chapter as well. And then, of course, there's the whole problem of what happened in the 1950s when post-war moderate, centrist, modernists, like assimilated modernism, took hold, and what might be called later, from the point of view of later, a kind of a conservative modernism, the neo-formalist modernism that we feature in the main syllabus in only 2 poems, that would have its own week as well. So I'm admitting to the flaw, and the flaw is partly about the constraints of having 10 weeks is already a long MOOC, a massive open online course. 10 weeks is very rare, usually they're 5 or 6 weeks. It's already pushing it. So we've jammed a lot into it, and the Canon challenge is sort of a challenge to it's a kind of meta-pedagogical challenge to the way we've organized our course. So I am being very explicit about the problems of this, okay? But what holds it together, what holds the 4 parts of week 5 together is this. Modernism raced ahead, and it forgot a few things. It left a few things in its wake. One was the social consciousness. You can derive a social sense and even a political sense from Gertrude Stein, but you have to work pretty hard at it. And if you're an artist who's losing their apartment because their mortgage was canceled or the bank took over in 1934 or 1935, or if you sneak off to the Spanish Civil War and you're fighting fascism, the last thing you want to do is be obscure in your use of language. You want to be coherent, you want to be clear, you want to be political, and the political poets of the 1930s castigated modernism for not being very explicit, for being hermetic. Okay, that was actually a bad word in the 1930s. So too, Robert Frost has his doubts about modernism. He's not so sure in Mending Wall whether the wall should be brought down. A modernist would want the wall down immediately. Frost has a kind of ambivalent relationship to the wall because he knows that the wall is the aesthetic. The wall makes the aesthetic relationship possible between 2 guys, the poet speaker and his neighbor who's not very thoughtful. The only reason they have a relationship is because of the formalities of the wall, which brings them together and creates a conversation, which is a kind of art. And as for the centrist modernists of the 1950s, they also had lots of doubts about modernism. They felt that somehow, in the case of the X.J. Kennedy poem about the nude descending a staircase, he might have said that what Duchamp is doing is taking advantage of the figure of the woman as a kind of excuse for cubism, and that runs roughshod over her beauty and the beauty of poetry. And then, wow, don't get me started on the Harlem Renaissance. They had a lot to learn. The Harlem Renaissance poets had a lot to learn from modernism, and they have a mostly positive relationship with modernism. However, they felt that certain things are missing, a kind of a respect for local culture, particularly American culture, for music, and for the forms that come from music. And also, in the case of Claude McKay and some others, they had a respect for what could be done radically with sonnets that someone like William Carlos Williams, who hated sonnets, would never go in for. So that is your Canon challenge. We think that week 5 is deeply flawed. However, we stand by the poets and the poems in week 5. What we can't stand by is that it's a decent transition from week 3 and 4, from the week 4 of Gertrude Stein or the Baroness, all the way forward to past week 6, which is about the beats, to week 7 to the New York school. Those in the New York school basically look back past the week 5 work back to week 4, and they pick up the narrative. And to some extent, we don't get back to the week 5 considerations until you get to week 9 and week 10. So that's a problem with the course. We still love it, and we hope you enjoy the poems of week 5. And we hope that this Canon Challenge actually gives you a chance to see us wrestling with the whole problem of making a syllabus.